Good evening. This is a continuation of the Wyndham-Raymond School District Board of Directors meeting begun in executive session. Could I have a motion, please?
I move to approve the student under consideration be readmitted to school and that the superintendent provide the parents with a written summary of the board's findings.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Should we take a break for you to talk, or are you?
That would be-
Okay. And thank you. We're going to take a couple of minutes of break. Thank you. Now we'll have the presentation of the 2021 district school calendar. Could I have Christine Hessler, please?
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to talk about, it's a kind of unbelievable to think about the 2021 school calendar in the middle of January. But for community at home, I'll just review quickly the process. December 2nd, we were able to meet with the 5 other schools in the Greater Sebago and the Sebago Alliance that we align our school calendars with due to the vocational school centers in Statute 4801 on school days, and so that our goal each year is to create a calendar within all of our districts that has no more than 5 dissimilar days in order to serve our students, which can be a little bit tricky, as in the past, as each of our school districts have different number of school days and different number of staff days as well. And so what I present to you tonight that you have in your notes is the calendar fully aligned with the other districts, ready for your questions and hopefully your approval. I also included for you another sheet that breaks down the calendar month by month, which I'll go through so community can also hear that. For example, in August, we have one staff day, which will be our new staff orientation, inviting our new staff in for training and a day of fun as well. Labor Day this year will be late. It is September 7th. And so we will be starting with students before Labor Day this year. If you look onto the calendar, we will have our traditional opening of schools where we do a gradual introduction of school for students in grades 1 through 9. And then the second day, grades 10 through 12 join, and then we do a staggered start to our kindergarten. So incoming kindergarten parents at screening will get more information of when they start and what those first couple of days of school look like, and welcoming our new students in. We will also have the Friday off before Labor Day, and then of course the Labor Day off. So it's back to our traditional start that we've had. The other pieces that are significant in our calendar is we were able to align both in-service days with the 5 districts. We have done a lot of shared professional development for content specialists through the work of the Greater Sebago Alliance, which are 11 districts, and one of our districts didn't have the March Day and actually has joined it because of the offerings that we're proposing for health, PE, art, music, OT, PT, nurses, regionally, that has been extremely well received to service our specialists in those areas. The other parts of the calendar are very similar to what we've had in the past. And we have kept an early release day for grades 6 through 12 in October in order to do some really longer PD for both of those school pieces in there. Our days end up starting before Labor Day, does get us out this next year on June 14th. And if I was to compare that with this year's calendar, that's a Monday. That would be our last day of school without snow. This year it would just be the Friday before. So we're only off by 1 day of where we had started when we're counting our days up. We also have on here our dates for, it's hard to even think about, but our kindergarten screening. So incoming parents for 2021 will know those dates that we will be screening our children for those parts. But I would be happy to answer any questions in regards to the calendar on here. And hopefully the breakdown on the back for you, or your second one, will show the months that we have an in-service day, or we have an early release for schools, and then the total of all the pieces and how they come together. I will also note that next November, on voting day, Jordan Small Middle School and Wyndham High School students will not attend due to keeping our schools safe for voting. And we've had that in the past, so we have a plan that we work those pieces out to have that time made up on that piece. Kate?
Do they have to make those days up?
They do. They make those days at the end of the year. Each school has a plan, and they did that similar last year, and we just notify all our parents on that piece.
What about kindergarten screening?
So kindergarten screening, kindergarten does not need to go 175 days. Kindergarten is exempt for that number, so we're okay with that piece when we screen our children. So,
Seniors and kindergartners are 170 days.
yep.
Oh, okay,
So.
that's good to know. Do you by any chance, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious what the student days are for other districts?
The other districts, there's one other district at 175, the other ones are at 177, and one district is at 178. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Pete?
Christine, do you know how many dissimilar days we ended up with?
We have ended up with, right now on this calendar, with 3. So, and that's with us starting where we're all starting, so. And that happens because a couple of the other districts have more professional development days. So for example, Gorham, our friends next door, have 2 in-service days in October, the rest of us have 1. So we run into those kinds of numbers that they have to have more days off with, well, students because of their contractual obligations to staff. So that's where we get some of those funky numbers. So.
Christine, can you tell me what are the other schools that we'd have to align ourselves with as far as dissimilar days?
So it's Westbrook, Bonnie Eagle, Scarborough, Gorham. I think that's it, and us, right? Westbrook, sorry, Westbrook.
Westbrook, Bonnie Eagle, Gorham,
Everyone,
Scarborough.
everyone that goes to the Westbrook Vocational Center, we're the primary. Fortunately, we don't have to align with Paths, who is 16 districts.
And they're starting the week before we are, just so you know. Gray and that company are starting actually earlier than next year, than we are starting earlier. So,
Anybody else have any other questions?
Yes. When it comes to voting, is there a way to shut down that section of the school? So how do we?
If I can
Yeah.
speak to
Please.
that.
Thank you.
The last well, 2 presidential elections ago, we tried to have school, and at Wyndham High School, back when I was principal there, it was an absolute disaster because there was hardly any parking space for anybody. Last presidential election, the high school was closed, and at 7 o'clock the parking lot was full. There was a line that went all the way down the canopy, around in front of chorus and band, and then all the way over to where the auxiliary gym is. I am guessing with this upcoming presidential election that we are going to see a very large turnout. In addition, Raymond will be voting on whether or not to stay within the RSU for this presidential election, so my guess is there'll be a large turnout at Jordan Small. So it's very difficult at Jordan Small with your cafeteria and everything else on that end. Plus, but parking is going to be very, very difficult to run school simultaneously. We run the high school on those smaller local elections where the turnout's a little bit smaller, but I think there were, 9,000 people that voted last time in Wyndham and close to 4,000 in Raymond. It was a lot of traffic.
Okay. Is it possible to, do you want to keep the building completely empty, even free of teachers? Was it discussed or thought of as far as maybe doing a in-service day for, okay.
yeah, so usually they do a half of professional day with their teachers. During that day, staff will come in, they'll do some training, they'll do whatever pieces, and then they make up that half a day piece there, and they work with their students. So they've used that as an opportunity to do that work.
Okay.
So,
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Okay, thanks, Christine.
you're welcome.
Okay, now we have Christine Frost-Bertinet is going to talk to us about an update on pre-K programming.
So if I can just start.
Yes.
To move into this. Christine Frost-Bertinet, who is our new assistant superintendent this year, in addition to doing a wonderful job as assistant superintendent, has shown quite a bit of success in starting pre-K programs, specifically in our previous school district. So one of the things that we discussed as part of our entry plan, and that's also has been a community discussion over the years, is how do we start to approach a pre-K program. I think one thing that's difficult for us in discussing a pre-K program is that we have to do planning and run it parallel to when we're doing budget. And so the Maine Department of Education asked us back in September if we were at all interested in exploring pre-K, that we had to get some potential numbers in so that as funding formula, a lot of that work happens in December, so they could start to work in those numbers. So there was that component. So Christine has convened a working group, and we thought it would be best working with leadership to really bring the board up to speed as far as what the working group has been done. In addition, this will be a budget discussion, and it's one of those items that as the A team works through the budget process and as Christine works through planning with her planning group on pre-K, they're going to run simultaneously. So in discussions and what Christine has taught me from other districts, this first year can be difficult in districts because you're running a planning process and you're running a possibility of opening it. And so what you'll hear tonight is really just an opportunity learn a little bit more about the planning process, what a program might look like in RSU 14 if we decide to go forward. But it is at this juncture, we're still working it with the budget process, and we'll determine whether or not that this is something that we can include in the budget depending upon where we are financially. Christine's going to share what she's learned so far and some of her experiences, and then we'll give plenty of opportunity to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. So you have some materials that I'll reference. You'll see them pop up. I'll try to point your attention to those materials, but you should have a paperclip collection in your packet. We'll see how I do with this. It's exciting to talk about pre-K, and I want to introduce, we have Nicole Medor, who is the new early childhood specialist for the Department of Education. Sue Reed had been in her position previously, and I believe had presented here back in 2015-16 when RSU 14 was first exploring pre-K as an option for programmatic growth in the district. So Nicole may jump in, and I've invited her to do so at any point. She has been very helpful. I email her regularly with questions, and there are a lot of details to starting any program. So this is a program proposal presentation. Nice use of alliteration there, if you like the 3 Ps. To all of you, and hoping to get input at the end, your ideas, questions, thoughts, so that we can continue the planning process. What we will do this evening is start out with some statistics that lead us to this sort of conversation around why pre-K, some compelling statistics, and we'll highlight a few, but then I'll point you to your packets where you can read more about the impact of some of these early initiatives on literacy, long-term trajectory for children in school. We're going to go over the program proposal overview, so you have a sense of all the pieces that the planning committee that they're looking at, transportation and nutrition, and making sure that we're in alignment with Chapter 124 and all sorts of programmatic pieces. Then we want to talk this evening a bit about the importance of this being a collaborative partnership with our local daycares and preschools, and so we'll talk about that and how we want to invite them to the conversation as soon as possible. Brief overview of curriculum and what the state of Maine's been working on that's very interesting, and I'll chat a bit about that this evening, and Nicole can certainly chime in. Next steps from this point forward, so you are abreast of where we're headed after tonight, and then we'll close out with some of your questions. So why pre-K, and why are school districts across the state of Maine looking at expanding their program offering to get to getting 4-year-olds in. So I just want to highlight 4 here. To begin, 53.3% of Maine's young children are not enrolled in preschool. And I have included all of the links to additional research from each of these groups, and you can see more in your packet. For every $1 spent on high-quality early education programs, the return on investment ranges from $4 to $17, according to Maine Children's Growth Council. If identified early and given research-based intervention, 90 to 95% of children at risk for reading failure will become fluent readers. And by age 3, trends in the amount of talk, vocabulary growth, and style of interaction are well established and suggest widening gaps. And this is something that the SEL committee is exploring, the social emotional learning group for the district. It's something that educators are talking a lot about. And so any opportunity where we can partner with our community and all stakeholders to get children these early programs, to get them started, it's a good thing. So that's why we're talking about pre-K. So what would the program look like? Some components of the program. The initial planning group has talked about a 4-day program model. There would be 32 children, 2 classrooms starting this first year. That would be, the hope would be the fall of the 2021 school year. So 16 students in each class. You'd have a teacher and an ed tech in each class for those 16 children. And this goes through daily schedule. You'd have a mixture of small group and large group activity, physical movement, very play-based curriculum that we can get into a little bit later. Rest time is built in, family style dining, lunch in a classroom, so children are having all sorts of opportunities to learn beyond math and reading, but it's all that social interaction and very experiential in the design. Assessments, we will be mapping out sort of what assessment looks like in pre-K and the frequency of checking in on their growth. All of the assessment work would be in alignment with the MELD standards, Maine's Early Learning Development Standards. So the current plan talks about reporting out to parents at least twice within that year formally. Ongoing conversations are always ideal. So that regular partnership with families is a component, and that the assessment, you know, again, in alignment with MELD standards, but also we'll talk about the pre-K for Me curriculum model and how assessment's built in. Nutrition, we've met with Jeannie Riley and starting that conversation around what the breakfast and lunch program would look like and how that would impact the current program model. Community and family engagement I mentioned. Transportation, we've been working with Mike Kelly on what that would look like. Offering transportation, not necessarily door-to-door as was discussed in 2015-16. I think the other proposal was not door-to-door, but maybe having group stops where parents could get to a bus and then have a monitor help the children on that bus and get safely to Raymond Elementary School, where there is space for 2 classrooms. Wyndham and Raymond residents would have the ability to apply and show interest in registering their child for one of those 32 spaces. The flyer that I have included in your packet is a draft. This is something that could be used to get the message out, among other strategies, but to get the message out to our communities. So this is written as a proposal to you all for consideration, and then we would finalize it and get it out as soon as possible. Invite the community members, parents, families, private pre-K, daycare providers, and get folks to a discussion around the program design, the number of days within the school year, all sorts of details. So those are outlined here. The who, The criteria for the state in terms of the children who are eligible need to turn 4 before October 15th of 2020. If a child turns 5 prior to October 15th, they would not be eligible for the pre-K space. They would be eligible for the kindergarten, for registering for kindergarten. We went over class sizes and the location of the program in Raymond due to space availability. In calculating the 4 days per week full day program model, we'd be looking at 138 days being offered during the 2020-21 school year. We are working on what the registration process would look like and how to ascertain family interest in getting people to apply. We would have a lottery system, so we would, because we only have 32 spaces, we're working on the details of what those spaces would look like and what percentage would be reserved for people who qualify for free and reduced lunch, what percentage for non-free and reduced lunch qualifiers, children with special needs, partnering with CDS Reach in Portland. We've met with Lori Whittemore to talk about what that would look like. So all of those details are in the process of being fleshed out. The Pre-K for Me curriculum, for those of you who haven't heard about this, we're several years in, I believe, Nicole, 4 years in, 3? Is it year 2 officially? Okay. Oh, there you go. So Pre-K for Me is a beautiful design for early learners. They are learning a lot by partnering with Boston Public Schools that's been doing this work for quite some time. And so taking the Boston curriculum design and then making it work and sort of meet the needs of Maine students. It's very play-based, experiential in its design. It has integrated curriculum, so a cross-content area sort of approach to bringing children into these experiences with a lot of center-based learning, social emotional skills embedded within that, learning how to regulate emotions, identify your emotions, collaborate with peers, give and take, and all sorts of wonderful pieces built into the curriculum design. So the next steps right now, so presenting to you for your consideration, getting your questions and your ideas, coming back, I would anticipate, and presenting again with periodic updates. We would want to hold a community event in March, get a flyer when it's ready out to the public, get those registration materials out to the public, get the word out and the interest out, and then once we get through that process and determine the 32 students to fill the 2 classrooms, we would start the planning and professional development side of the work, and then summer of 2020 have the screening for those 32 students so that we are ready to begin the school year. So I went through that quickly so that we could let some of this digest, and you can have these materials to peruse, and we'll return to this conversation at a later time, but I'll pause for...
Just a couple things that I can add, and I know many were on the board when pre-K was looked at before. And at the time that you looked at pre-K, the state was running, think of it like a reimbursement model, where first year you were required as a board to upfront the money, and then second year those students would be then included in your numbers and then included in your subsidy count. States changed the model around a little bit so that this time around kids would be considered in our count as if they were students enrolled, and we would receive the subsidy up front as part of our February 279. So not working the reimbursement model. The other thing Christine shared with me, I think right now 80% of districts in Maine are currently operating a pre-K program of some level. And as Christine shared, we are by no means ready space-wise for universal pre-K in RSU 14. We do not have the space. If this is something that we want to move forward with, a small pilot is beneficial because it gives an opportunity to for us to determine what are the strengths and weaknesses, what are the other things we need to work on. And realistically, it won't be until we have a new building with maybe some possible shifts in grade configurations that would then allow us to have a space where we could do universal pre-K across the district, should the board decide to head in that direction. So a little change in the funding model, which financially is a little bit better for us. And what we're trying to, again, you have to run a planning if it's something moving forward, and you have to run it simultaneously with budget. And again, both will impact each other as to whether or not we can move forward. I've asked Christine to look at some of the timelines, because the last thing that we really want is for students to be screened and then we don't have it within a budget. So we want to be sure that we're moving forward with this before we go through a screening process, because we don't want to get the hopes of families up and then it's not something that we're able to do.
Marge?
I'm just curious, and I know there's a lot of other places that are doing it, and I'm only asking because four-year-olds in an all-day program 4 days a week, what's been the past experience on that? Because I remember we went to all-day kindergarten here with kindergartners. There was concern about that. So could you just, I'm not sure who.
Do you want to jump in, Nicole? Sure. Here, do you want to come up? Sure. Yep.
So it does seem a bit overwhelming because they're so young, and it's a common conversation that we have nationwide. Maine's not immune to this question or this concern for sure. We know research and studies have been done to show that the more exposure students have to a consistent, high-quality program, the higher student outcomes they have later in the year, as well as later in their education, right? So third grade, fourth grade, etc. We also know that it's more compelling to families to have a full-day option, so for their work schedules. Oftentimes families have difficulty finding care in the AM or the PM or whichever time of the day that the student isn't in a pre-K program. So a lot of districts are moving towards that model for that reason as well. Of the 80% of districts that offer pre-K in Maine, the highest program model is 5 full days, so 38% of our districts are offering their students 5 full days of pre-K. So 4 full days is it's not necessarily next in line. The next in line would be 5 half days, is another common model as well. But it really depends on your community need and what your school's already offering. It was my understanding that Wednesdays are often a early release day, so that could be tricky for young students. It's a lot of transition for them in a week and in a day for that matter. So offering the 4 full days around that half early release day, I think was the thought process. You could speak better than that.
Well, and the other piece, just in having watched a full day program model for a year, children, that rest time's critical. So there is that built-in time, and there's a beautiful flow to the day where they're happy, engaged learners, and they're getting that rest time and that nice communal dining and sort of these opportunities where it's not exhausting. They're exhausted at the beginning of the year because they're little, and kindergartners are often exhausted at the beginning of the year. But it's a nicely designed model to the day.
Good, thank you.
I'm curious who's on the committee.
So right now, Christine Hessler, Chris Howell, Lisa Garno with her special ed background and lens, Jeannie Riley, nutrition, Mike Kelly, transportation, Beth Peavy, assistant principal at Raymond Elementary School, Randy Crockett, principal of both schools in Raymond, Kyle Rhodes, principal at Wyndham Primary School, to start some of the initial planning.
Will this be a standalone cost center, should we proceed? Or would this be kindergarten, or how are you viewing this for budgetary purposes?
It would be within the Raymond Elementary School budget, because that's where the program would be housed.
Okay.
I think the other thing that we've been talking about is, because you've got to do a split, because we're offering it to communities, but looking at how we allocate funds within the RSU, so probably a 65-35 split as by our local funding agreement initially to start up. But again, for an initial startup, you're looking at trying to target some of the neediest kids who may not necessarily have access to a program to make sure that they are fully ready and engaged for kindergarten program.
Thank you.
Pete?
Would it be appropriate to share just my initial thoughts, concerns, questions? All right. So obviously there's tremendous benefits to this, as you've outlined. Now, did you say that there's going to be a lottery system to determine the 32? All right, because when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about equal access to public education, and that's a bit of a concern for me. It doesn't feel like it's equal access when we're doing a lottery system. So in that regard, I would prefer to wait until we could offer like a universal program. The second thing that I was thinking about, the addition of another program, more students, is going to require more FTE, more bus drivers, more teachers, more aides. And we know that we're kind of struggling in those areas as it is right now. I mean, struggling to find bus drivers. With the labor market being as strong as it is, definitely a shortage of workers across all industries. More teachers means more need for substitutes, which again, that's a shortage of resources right now. I know when we examined this before, there was some talk about the impact to the local daycare providers, what it would do to their businesses. So that's something that I would want to have looked at, I want to have that looked into. And then we've got the withdrawal issue. So as far as a timing thing, is this something that we really want to look into now for a program that's going to be housed in Raymond with Wyndham and Raymond kids when November of 2020 there's going to be a vote that could just blow the whole thing up? So I don't have the answers, but those are my
Good questions.
initial
to pose.
thoughts.
Yeah.
If I could just speak to withdrawal. Should withdrawal move forward, we would be able to operate the program for one additional year because there's a stay put clause that students might be able to keep a program going. But that is a consideration that we need to take a look at, see where we're at with it. But good points, Pete.
Scott, did you have a question?
Pete just took all the macaroni and cheese off the plate.
Sorry, I should have left you some.
And just a quick one. And I agree with it, it's for transportation, recommended child safety restraint is appropriate. And on our vehicles right now, we have none. So does this mean additional vehicles in the budget?
It would mean that in one of our upcoming bus replacements, and we have a couple due to be replaced, that the seat order would come through with the seats that are integrated as part of them. Part of the rich discussion, which is the transportation, because when you are doing a targeted model, transportation becomes most efficient when you are doing everybody versus a few. And so looking at a single bus doing the transportation up and through with an aide, so that somebody would be on the bus to help buckle students in with some specific drop-off points, working its way through Wyndham and then up into Raymond and then vice versa. But we can get buses equipped with the fold-out seats that then fold back in and then turn into big kid seats and then fold down and become 5-point harness.
I just have one comment on that. When we do the Jump Start program, because my grandson was in the jump, and that was one bus that picked up all the kids, I mean, that was only in Wyndham. He was on the bus for 45 minutes. They ended up having to drive him because he fell asleep, because he's young. He fell asleep every day on the bus. So if we had one, so it's more than one bus, I guess you're saying, because if we're going to do Wyndham
Single
and
bus.
Raymond, it would be,
32 students, single bus.
okay, because it took 45 minutes to go from our house up to
So
Manchester.
if we move forward with this, there would be a
I
stop at
think
Wyndham High
there's a
School.
problem.
There'd be a stop at Manchester School, and there'd be a stop at Mill Street.
Okay.
So they're not going to every house.
They have to be there a certain
Yep.
time.
Correct. To
And
do a
people could
cluster.
bring their kids to school.
Or they
And
could
they
bring
can
them,
bring
drop
them.
them off, but looking at clusters versus,
Sure.
we do not, there's not the efficiency to go door to door.
No, there isn't.
And it really needs to be expressed, and I think if you can think about the model now that we currently have students that are dropped at Manchester School,
Right.
that a few that are coming up here to RES, and so it would be similar where the bus would meet them, and then you'd be looking at one bus with 32 students and an aide and a bus driver, and what we've learned is best practice is to have an aide on the bus to seat belt all the little guys and gals in and make sure everybody makes it to school safely.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brooks?
Could you talk to me a little bit about the curriculum?
I can, I'll turn it over to Nicole. Do you want to talk about it? Okay. I'd love to talk about the curriculum, but we'll leave the experts here.
So Boston Public Schools started their curriculum, so obviously they're a large school district and very urban based, and they began their curriculum work in kindergarten and then determined that they were also lacking an appropriate curriculum for their preschool, and they also run a program for 3-year-olds. So they wrote for those grades as well and have since wrote for their first grade and second grade. With help from a federal grant that Maine was awarded 5 years ago, we were able to take that money and partner with Boston Public Schools to revamp that curriculum and make it appropriate for Maine, so a more rural setting. So that's what we've been doing all last school year. We piloted the program in multiple districts across the state, up north to East Range, down south to Lyman, Waterboro, etc. And those teachers really gave us a lot of feedback, and so over the summer we tweaked what we needed to tweak, and now it's free and available online for anyone to use. Private childcare, school districts, you name it. We're still working out some of the kinks as far as training for teachers, because it's not a curriculum you can just pick up and run with. But there really is intense training around the components, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're reading what we're reading. It's largely a literacy-based curriculum, and like Christine said, there's a big play component as well. The pre-K curriculum covers 6 units throughout the school year. Each one's about 4 to 5 weeks long. Has very specific materials, very specific literature. We made sure that all of the books needed for the read-alouds and for the library center are available in Maine through the library system. So while we would encourage districts to purchase the materials, if that's not in the budget, then they can borrow them. So that was one thing that was important. We knew, so since Chapter 124 is our public pre-K program standards, and within that is monitoring for pre-K programs, and in doing that in the last 5 years, we saw what a hardship curriculum was. Most of the evidence-based appropriate pre-K curriculums that are available come with a heavy cost, and we heard loud and clear from districts that it just was not feasible. So we had to do something to accommodate for our state, to have a high-quality program that teachers could do and implement regularly, and know that they will achieve outcomes for their students with it. It's really meant to be in a full-day setting, but it has a half-day option as well, which can be tweaked to not necessarily 5 days. You could do 4 days, 3 days, etc. And so this year we have those piloting classrooms are continuing to use it, and we've added on 6 more districts, I want to say off the top of my head, that are using it as well. And now we've also designed and written the K for Me as well, so similarly to Boston's work in kindergarten. So.
In your experience, and I know you haven't been in it like years and years, but can you tell me what the benefit or the pros and cons of having a pilot first before you launch into a full-blown gig?
Right. Well, a full-blown universal pre-K in a district this size, I don't know your kindergarten numbers, but that would be a good number to gauge it on. So, do you know off the top of your head?
212 right now.
So if you're looking at about 200 4-year-olds to accommodate, that's a huge undertaking, especially because Chapter 124 has really strict guidelines around class size, class ratios, so it's limiting. Where in kindergarten, you could go up to 25, get a waiver for maybe a few more students with one adult. That's not the case in pre-K. So
What is it in pre-K?
it's one adult to 8 students. So in a class of 16 students, you'd have 2 adults.
Wow,
One lead teacher and an assistant.
that's a lot of staff.
It's a lot of staff. Yep, it is. Yep. So it would behoove you, I think, to do a smaller pilot, sort of get your feet wet and understanding that 4-year-olds are different, right? It's a different program. It's a different expectation. The families are often, much more inclined to want what's best and want to be more involved. We see that trickle as years go by, unfortunately. So starting small, to Christine's point, 2 classrooms I think is a nice number. I don't think there's a magical number necessarily, but a lot of districts aren't universal yet. So it's something that the whole state's working towards.
What kind of pushback, in your experience from the private sector,
Yeah.
what we might expect?
Yeah, so it's hard to compete with free if you're offering a
That's
free
true.
program. Yes, it is. From my point of view, from the state's point of view, it's another option for families. Many of our low-income families can afford quality care, so having a free option that's high quality is certainly going to benefit them. We always try and recommend districts in your situation where you won't be meeting the full need to try and consider heterogeneous mixed classrooms, meaning students of low income mixed with students of high income, mixed with students with IEPs, diverse backgrounds, etc. So to your point, Pete, when you mentioned the lottery system and wanting to make sure that it's open and available to all, the lottery system can really help you to define who and how you're going to enroll a student. So for example, if RSU 14, this is just for argument's sake, if RSU 14 has 50% of their students K-12 that qualify for free and reduced lunch, it would benefit to model that in pre-K. So you might reserve 8 students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. If you have 20% students in the district who have an IEP, then you might have 3 seats available in pre-K for students with an IEP. So that way you get a heterogeneous mix. It models the percentages in the district wide, and it makes it a little more, versus being first come, first serve. Because in that scenario, in a small program, you likely will, that's not going to be fair and open to all potentially. So something to consider. We don't dictate from the state level your enrollment policies. That's entirely a local decision, but we get asked that a lot. And it's back to the community pushback. It's part of the pre-K application process that districts show sort of a good faith effort that they've reached out to their community to say, this is what we're going to offer. Let's meet about this. What are you offering? How can we work in tandem, etc. So those conversations will need to be had and proven to us that they've been had, whether it's through minutes or a sign of approval or a sign of support from the community. We don't want rough waters at all.
No, right.
Do we have any data about how many of our incoming kindergarten have attended preschool?
I don't even know if that's asked in screening. I'm not sure, Janie, but I can check.
It would be
I will check in.
I think that would be a
interesting to know.
great question to ask.
It's hard to get at the state level.
We don't collect that
Yeah,
data.
because some
Right.
students are enrolled in private preschool, and so there's no way to tell.
Right. Yeah, and in looking universally, a lot of our districts are looking to partner with their community private providers. So that's something that if you do get a lot of pushback, having that conversation and being upfront around, well, how can we partner potentially, if you provide a wraparound service, or if you have a staff member who is a 081 lead teacher, you could potentially educate some of our students there, and the district could claim them as your students receive your subsidy, etc. Chapter 124 standards are still going to come into play. They align really well with licensing standards, so typically there's not very many barriers as far as that's concerned. But sometimes the education and certification of the staff can be a hindrance.
And I hate to dwell on transportation, but I keep thinking of inequity and so forth, and you've made the statement that hopefully these would help, this program would help a lot of low income, et cetera. And it goes back to the transportation. I think a lot of those folks would not have the means to be able to get that child to that cluster stop. So if it's something that you could just take back to your group and discuss what and if there's anything that can be done about that, because if they need it the most and they can't get there, then they wouldn't fill the application, I guess. But that's gonna be part of the requirement, that you have to be able to either drive them or get to the cluster stop. Sorry, I'm done.
Kate?
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I understand, when you said 1 to 8, is that a certified teacher? Or is it a teacher and an ed tech and you
Correct.
go up to 16?
Correct.
Oh, okay, because I was like, we'll never have enough space for that.
Right, so a
Okay.
teacher and an ed tech 3 would be.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just share some things I'm really excited about in hearing this? I think the idea of having a pilot program starting in Raymond is an opportunity for us to really start to integrate or better integrate it as one RSU. Oftentimes, as a Raymond resident, I send my kids into Wyndham for everything, but very rarely do I see Wyndham coming out to Raymond, which is fine. You know, I moved to Raymond, I expected that, but what a great opportunity to really make it one district. It's something I even heard, I'm gonna throw you under the bus, Kate, sorry. Even as we were coming over here tonight, we had I'm sorry, you had to drive out here, all the way out here. We're one district, we drive in for Wyndham stuff, there's no, come out to Raymond, we love you guys, no problem. So it's a fantastic opportunity that way. I know when my kids were young and both parents in the house, we had no choice but to work 40 plus hours a week. Finding a quality preschool, pre-K program that I could afford was pretty impossible. It was a real struggle. And then we added to it, a lot of the pre-K programs would be, chunks of hours during the day, and then you had to pay more for care on either end. So at that point, that's an entire paycheck and we can't do it. So what a fantastic opportunity to be able to sort of level the playing field a little bit and get those kids that, that might not be able to through, it's just a fact of life. So I think that's a wonderful thing. And the other thing that I really am excited about, little kids' parents tend to be more involved with the little kids, and it's a really fantastic way. We moved to Raymond when my kids were already older. They were in first, second grade. So we didn't necessarily get to build those connections, and still to this day, my oldest one graduated 2 years ago. I can't tell you that I necessarily know a whole lot of people, but what a great way to get families to build those communities and those connections early on with folks throughout the district, not just the people that live next door, but Raymond families knowing Wyndham families knowing, it's an awesome thing. And I think there will be things that we need to work out, but I'm not one for not doing something because it might be hard. We have a good opportunity here.
Well said.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
Would you mind just throwing up the timeline again real quick?
This doesn't include everything, Scott. This is sort of in chunks, major pieces that we need to do between now and a proposed start for fall of 2020.
If I can just add, at some point in the future, given policy direction in Augusta, at some point in the future, universal pre-K will be a requirement for all public institutions. And so one thing, and this is probably the part that Christine's heard me say the most, is we want to make sure that we don't get out too far ahead of ourselves to make sure that we've got a program that's going to work. It's going to work on the timeline for the budget. The other thing is that we want to have a high quality program. We don't want to do something halfway, because if we're going to do it, we're going to do it well. So appreciate the comments tonight and some things and some feedback that we can bring back to the committee. But at some point in the future, this will be a requirement. Right now, we can say we don't have the space, but in the future, we won't be able to say that, and we will need to have learned some lessons and understood, how do we best do a program like this.
Hey,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
How many neighboring districts offer pre-K?
Well, you have a number. You've got Gray, Westbrook, Bonnie Eagle, Gray
Falmouth,
Nichols.
Yarmouth,
Yeah.
SAD 51, Cumberland, North Yarmouth,
This forum?
Portland,
Gorham
does-
not yet, but I believe they're in the process, no?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Space issues. Falmouth doesn't.
Westbrook doesn't.
51.
51, 6, 57.
I could get you a list of all southern Maine.
That would be great.
I'm already getting calls asking, do we have pre-K, along with Jumpstart. Already in January, people are moving and they're asking, where do we sign up for pre-K? Because other communities have it, and
Well, and as Chris said earlier, we're almost at 80% of the districts in Maine are offering a pre-K program. So we're getting there.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think this is a great opportunity for us to establish the connections among all of the pre-K teachers, pre-K programs in this area too. If we're going to be going to universal pre-K in the next 5 years or so, or however long it is, then to start now in establishing those good relationships and partnering is always a good thing, I think.
It is, and there's a lot that we can learn from them, and we want
Right.
to engage in the conversation, see it as we're serving the two communities of Wyndham and Raymond to meet all of those early childhood needs, so that these children, as they enter kindergarten, are kindergarten ready.
Right.
Okay. Can you share a little bit more on exactly what's going to happen at the community event?
Sure. And I didn't bring that other piece with me, but I have a draft agenda. We would certainly review the elements of this flyer. So the program model, we talk a bit about curriculum. We'd get their insights and input about the programs that are being offered currently. 32 students, 2 classrooms located in Raymond, the details of the proposed program. And the conversation, as Jenny was just talking about, starting that partnership with them. Because the conversation is continuing on at the state level around universal pre-K, and whether it's next year, the following 3-5 years down the road, I don't know. But I think starting this work with them. And in my previous district, when we had these conversations and there were concerns around it impacting their business, they were brainstorming and talking about ways of expanding their own program offerings. And some of the feedback was that it hadn't impacted enrollment because the needs are great in our communities. So does that answer some of your question?
Will that be a one shot? I mean, is it kind of like, you're going to have it like on a Saturday or one night for both communities?
Well,
I'm assuming that that's what it's for, to get the information out to the public?
my goal would be to have 2 different offerings with the same information, so we can have people come to a place that doesn't feel too far away, and that we've had multiple nights, so that it's
Okay, great.
okay.
I was just interested.
The details of the dates and the frequency, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. Anyone else set? Scott?
Just one more question. When are we voting on proceeding with this?
It will be, any decision to go forward with this will be part of the budget.
Okay.
And so if we can afford it under the budget, that's a discussion. If we can't afford it under the budget, then we'll take what we've learned this year and look at further down the road. Obviously, we have other bad budget challenges, and
Right.
the good news, though, and just again reiterate, currently we receive anywhere between 7,100 and 7,300 per elementary student, and I'm hoping the state stays with that model times 32, which is additional subsidy that would be used to offset costs related to this. The good news is that we have some empty classrooms at Raymond Elementary School, that absolutely nothing is going on right now. So initially, our cost is going to be some personnel costs, and then some transportation with an aide and a bus driver. And Mike's trying to work his magic to see if we can integrate one of the current bus drivers within the model. I think sometimes we've gone to the well a little too much with him, but to see what we can do. But again, if we're purchasing a bus We would just purchase it with the necessary seats to be able to move forward. And we have one of those seats currently in district that came on one of our buses. It's sitting on the mezzanine at the transportation facility, all by itself.
Just one?
Just one. We have one seat right now, so we
we
can start a
have two
program with two
students.
students. With 2 students at this point.
So, should we consider maybe moving that community event to a date in April? Because we typically will do a lot of our cost centers during the month of March.
That's a good point.
It's the entire month of March.
And
And then we usually deliberate.
The whole
What?
month of April.
Yeah, pretty much. I don't want to. I like this idea. I really do. I'm just I'm seeing the roadblocks,
Right.
and so I'm trying to figure out how we can navigate around those roadblocks successfully.
I think it's a good suggestion. I think we could move it to an early April couple of dates, and it gives us a little bit more time. And then have a bit of a tighter turnaround on the registration information coming in to know the interest. Because you want to make sure you get those notifications out and you have that communication ready for summer planning, PD, screenings, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nicole, for coming. Really appreciate it. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to the school board subcommittee. We talked about this to a brief extent last time, and before you, you have information about the sort of the overview and purpose of this committee. And I've asked Christine to talk about this, if you don't mind.
So what you have in front of you is just a draft after hearing about your last board meeting and the proposal of the purpose behind this committee. And for myself, I'm really excited about this piece. And the overview is this committee would consider and make recommendations concerning the district board policies of education and research. Right now, I get to come to you at least once a year. I see you more often, but to talk about our achievement report and the things that are going on, and I always feel like sometimes we're flying through it. And this standing committee would give us the opportunity for me to bring forward, to share with you the work that we're doing in mathematics at the high school, or the connection in 8th grade for writing, and those a little bit deeper into the teaching and learning aspects of the district and what's going on. I mean, my head's already spinning with all the different pieces. That'd be great to have an opportunity to have some of my teacher leaders, myself, share with the board committee the work that we're doing, and hear your input and hear some questions and help clarify some of the pieces that are being done across the RSU, because in K-12 and curriculum, it's an awful lot of subject areas and content areas, and there's a lot changing. Concurrently, we're waiting for February vacation to hopefully see the new ELA standards that have been rewritten and proposed out there. There are all these pieces coming that we need to continue to keep working and revising and aligning what we do in the RSU to serve our students. And this committee would be an opportunity to share that information a little bit more deeper with committee members, to answer questions. Much like your facility committee works, you have different pieces that come up. This would be very similar to those pieces that we're looking at. It would include our local assessment results as well. It would include, I put kindergarten/pre-K. Again, this is a draft. If pre-K happens to come on board, that's another piece that would be a great opportunity to be updating the progress of any of our programs. And then if, review and provide any significant changes in the curriculum that may have to happen. And then work with other committees, for example, finance or policy, if there are things coming up in my world that will be affecting the budget or policy matters, we would have another venue for that piece to do that here. And again, this is a draft that I've taken, so, when I think about a committee meeting, would be like our new business, our old business, our questions we might have, updating who would be coming to see you. So, I feel like there are some years that we're doing everything K-12, and other years we're really focused on, for example, kindergarten that we're working with right now would be a great opportunity. So there's so many different avenues that this would be an opportunity for each of those pieces, in my crazy world, for you to hear about. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions or have a dialogue on what this might look like in support of this standing committee if you choose to do this piece.
Mayor?
Sorry, just laughing.
I think this is a great idea. I just have a silly question. What is the difference between a committee and a subcommittee?
Well,
You have a facilities committee.
right.
This, on the agenda here, it's called a subcommittee, but on the memo here, it's called a curriculum committee.
Right, it'll be a standing committee. The standing committees that we have right now are facilities, finance, and policy. Those are the three. This will be the fourth standing committee, and it's
It's
a
a
sub.
standing,
It's a standing committee, but it is a subcommittee of this committee.
got it. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And the big guy can talk too.
As Mrs. Bricks always teaches me about policy, you do have a board policy that requires any time that you introduce a standing committee that you take a vote as a board to approve that standing committee.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Would this have like a regular, like a regular meeting, or would it be a meet as necessary type thing?
My vision, and I can do whatever, but when I was drafting through, when I looked at other districts that have these, they have a like you do with finance and policy, there's a set time that we would touch base with
Monthly?
pieces. Yeah.
I mean,
that's-
in all honesty, we don't, finance doesn't meet monthly, has it?
No.
So,
No,
and,
that's why I was asking.
and we don't need.
Facilities
like,
doesn't either.
It's as needed.
As needed, really.
Right.
And
And
is-
that's the decision, I guess, of the board. We
Yeah,
can
I mean,
start and see,
whatever.
like,
I guess as the committee gets together and establishes
Determine.
norms, it can determine how often it would want to meet, or,
Per Robert's rules, it's the decision of the committee.
right, exactly.
Sounds good.
yeah.
Okay. Could I have a vote, could I have a motion, please?
I move to approve a new school board curriculum subcommittee.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any public comment? Any board discussion? Okay. All in favor? No opposed? Motion carries. If you have an interest in being on this committee, would you please let me know? All right. Superintendent's report.
I'm going to try to do this without coughing.
Good
First of
luck.
all, this is midterms weeks for all of our high school students, so we want to make sure we get our student rep home at a decent time, because I'm sure that she has plenty of studying to do when she gets home. You have an English assessment tomorrow? Good luck. Good luck with it. Had the pleasure this weekend of attending Wynnum Middle School's production of Mary Poppins Jr., and I have to admit publicly that I had actually never seen Mary Poppins, so I didn't know. I didn't know how it ended. So, yes, I've watched all seasons of Seinfeld, but I've never seen Mary Poppins. It was an absolutely fantastic production, and just my congratulations to the crew. The level of production. They brought in Foy again, who did the flying for Peter Pan, and so the kids were flying as part of the production on the wires and such like that. But the student singing it was fantastic. It was well done, high quality. It was a great way to spend a Saturday afternoon, and I believe that there are productions happening this weekend. So if you've not had a chance to see it, It is a great show. It's a bunch of fun, and it does have a happy ending. So I know that now. And
Staff development's gonna have to get on the books right there.
Wow.
sometimes I'd rather read policy, but that's okay. I shared in your board packets this week, but also just want to share with the public. We were pretty excited to learn this week that under the Volkswagen diesel settlement, that RSU 14 has been awarded $65,000 towards the purchase of a clean burning diesel bus. And so we will be looking to use that money to offset a bus purchase in this upcoming budget. It is a great opportunity to, again, update our fleet and to receive some monies. We had applied for the grant previously, and we were not considered in the first round. But again, we now have a bus, and I did have the opportunity. Mike Kelly showed up in my office today and said, "Can you come with me? We're going to go for a ride." Which, going with an ex-police chief, you wonder where you're going. But out front was a brand new gasoline bus that has been loaned to the district, and it's something that we'll be talking about with the board and in the future, and looking at maybe it's time to convert some of our fleet over to gasoline. Some of the benefits that were shared with us today as far as long-term maintenance, reliability, as well as with some of the diesel buses, the number of monitors and other things to make them clean, that we have our technicians now chasing sensors left and right. And so it's something we're going to take a look at. 16 miles per gallon versus 6. And right now unleaded is cheaper than what we're paying for diesel. And then some of the other associated costs with, I think the part that kind of blew my mind was, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, so someone will correct me, but when our diesels are going in, it's between 40 and 50 quarts of oil for an oil change, and these are 7. With, instead of 3 filters, 1 filter. So maybe some long-term savings. In addition, the DEF system, which is actually what controls the clean burning, to replace one of those, I think is close to 12 grand on a bus. We could actually replace the entire motor on a gasoline one. So they took me for a ride around the block. It was not what I was expecting today, but it's something that we will be presenting to you. Just some updates, because I think it's important for the community to hear, because this board has invested quite a bit in energy savings and looking at how do we put more money towards the classroom. Already in Raymond, with the installation of the new boilers, we've saved 3,800 gallons of oil, which is amazing when you think Jordan Small uses 20,000 gallons a year. Same thing with RES across the street. So great savings there. And then with the lighting projects on the Wyndham campus, with turning Wyndham Primary School and Wyndham High School in the parking lots LED, we're close to $14,000 savings in electricity over where we were last year in 4 months. So it's a nice quick turnaround. We've received our efficiency main rebates, and we're looking at ways that we can roll those rebates in and continue to have the savings. And again, it's money that we do not have to put into things that are consumable, so they can go into classrooms. So excitement there. Just for the public, we will be entering budget season soon, and I will be before you the last week of February presenting the superintendent's budget right here in Raymond. So we're getting close to that budget season, and we have some decisions to make. We should know February 1st what our initial look is at subsidy. The commissioner has promised us that we'll get our ED 279s on that date, and we'll see where we're at. And then lastly, I'll end with is I think we're getting close to the end of a withdrawal agreement, and the committee will be meeting again for the RSU very soon to look at the most recent Raymond proposal. But I think the two sides are getting closer and closer to maybe an agreement of what that might look like, to start making that look at a public document. So a lot of things going on right now, but some exciting things.
Thanks. Now we have board roundtable. If anyone has anything to say, speak now.
I do.
Yes.
I'm actually going to go see our Wyndham High School Alpine Ski Team host a race Friday night at Shawnee Peak.
Oh, wow.
They typically only host 1 race per season. Mr. Howell said he'd go ahead and not make it this weekend, but hopefully next Friday night, because he says he's never been to one.
Just like
Yay.
Mary Poppins.
There you go. Great to have a
hope
lot
that
more representation.
Has a happy ending.
I happened to ride a chairlift week or so ago with a woman who is the mom of somebody on the team, and that was really exciting. Hopefully I'm able to catch up with her and wish the kids luck. They've got race suits and are doing well, and
That's cool.
The weather's holding.
and the snow is amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
That's great. Good job. Anybody else?
It's a bit of old news, but I've never congratulated her yet. I just wanted to say congratulations to Heather Whitaker, who is the main teacher of the year. Now, she's not a teacher within our district, but she lives in our district. Happens to be a neighbor, and she was on the State of the State last night that Jan Mills did, and she does fantastic work, not only in the classroom, but for the community, with the community gardens and stuff. So nice work, Heather.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. Could I have an executive session motion, please?
I move to enter into executive session to discuss RSU 14 contract negotiations with the RSU 14 Board of Directors pursuant to 1 MRSA subsection 405-6D and not return to regular meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Okay.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank
Good luck
you.
tomorrow.